Okay, so, all right, my friends. One of the questions is, what is the integral view? And so that's something I want to speak to right away. Again, at the top of the slideshow here, we want to try to see the entire spiral, and not necessarily by looking at it from an external, where we're privileging our perspective and we're kind of orienting from a mono-perspectival view. But we also want to look, what does it look like to be at or within any one of these levels, and then inhabiting a certain worldview, a Weltanschauung, a value stack? What does the world look like through that lens? So I'm going to invite all of our listeners to kind of take off their standard integral lens or their standard perceptual framework and just put it to the side. You can still look through it because you're naturally going to be like, well, I disagree with this, or that's not how I see things. Great. And probably not. But the invitation here is that, how do things look when you look through this lens, and where might you gain appreciation, insight, or awareness by looking through this lens that can supplement the lens, your preferred lens or your native lens, or your own sort of curiosity in your learning. So that's the emotional, social, cultural context here is to invite that curiosity, to increase empathy and appreciation for the other half of the country that voted differently than you. Something I want to speak about here is, we all kind of imagine our cognition or our awareness. We don't really reflect on that much. So I mentioned John Vervaeke earlier. He talks a lot about 4E cognition, and this lines up with the 4 quadrants a little bit, but our cognition is embodied. I was sharing with Keith here before we got on the call that I recently had to get my appendix removed in an emergency fashion, and I went from being a guy with a headache to being systemically ill over the course of the day. So my cognition was fully embodied. I wasn't thinking about integral anything when I'm laying there on the gurney and prepping for the operating room. I just felt like shit because I was fully embodied with a necrotic appendix getting ready to burst. So it's a very real experience, especially if we're underfed, underrested, etc. Embedded, we're not an independent agent, although many of us here in the West feel that we are. We're embedded and fully formed by various physical, social, cultural systems. From what before we're born, as we're being grown in our mother's womb, we learn a native language of the culture we're embedded in. We learn the rituals, routines, practices. We come up within the structured reality of our culture, whether it's going to school or working on a farm or dynastic Egypt or the Aztec Empire. All those people are born within and embedded within the culture, and it's going to frame their cognition. We're extended, which I think is amazing. We're not bound by our body, but we're extended to other people and objects. One of the metaphors here is a blind person with a cane. Like, that cane is the tip of their cognition, where they're creating a map of the world based on what their cane is telling them. A spider and its web. It's like, imagine your eyes closed and you're listening to a web, and you're building a mental model of the world based on that. But for us, this is where it's relevant here. What's our news feed? What's our information stream? Who are the people we're talking to? What information are we getting? And how is it predetermining our independent agentic thoughts? And finally, go ahead.
I'm sorry, just one question there. Did you say enacted? Could you give me that again? I was
Enactive is the last one. I skipped. I have a different order here. Yeah. Enactive, it's brought about by that reciprocal relationship between us and our environment. So an example often given is like, the shape of our hand is round. So we make round drinking glasses, but then the round drinking glasses that kids and babies are getting then shapes their hand to our feet. Our feet are shaped by our shoes, just like our shoes shape our feet. So it's the myth of the given of like, oh, I'm just an independent agent that popped up here, I'm going to do philosophy. It's like, well, no, you're embodied, embedded, enacted, and extended. So that's kind of like the 4 quadrants, and help reminding us that none of these things, we can't be reduced to any one of these modules, much like we can't be reduced to the quadrant. So again, I mentioned this here as a way to increase the empathy and appreciation for people who have a different perspective than us, because they've had different life experiences. They've had different childhood. They have different brain wiring. They have different culture that they've grown up in, a different language, a different filtering system, and a different information feed. So it's not like they're a bad person because they voted differently. It's like, oh, wow, let's be curious about how different they are. So that's kind of where I wanted to touch on this one.
And I would encourage, since there's a lot here, just, we can go at sort of a leisurely pace, my friend.
All right, let me drink another sip of my coffee and I'll slow down.
Because I think if you're listening, we just want to give people a little space to take
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
So another thing that I think is relevant here is that for many people, politics is the central tentpole of their meaning-making system. They wake up and they're reading the newspaper and they're talking to their friends, and it's kind of like the constant, ever-present topic. And for many other people, it's just not. Like some people, they spend most of their time and energy worrying about their family, or some people spend most of their time wondering when the next, they're planning for next year's Burning Man already. It's like this is a big thing that their life literally revolves around. It's the center point of their life. And I want to remind us all here that, again, for many people, their political choice is not something they spend that much time and energy grinding on. They kind of tune in. It's a lot of noise, a lot of people shouting, all the commercials, like, my opponent is going to kill you, but I'm going to save you. It's like every ad kind of sounds like that. They're going to throw babies off the wall. We're going to save the baby. So it's very hard for people who aren't already invested in that to kind of look at it from a open-minded, objective place. So there's going to be people who voted that really don't care as much about politics as you may care. And you may be somebody who doesn't care. And you can appreciate the other people, like they're volunteering at the polls. They've got yard signs, they got bumper stickers. They're just all in. And, some people like that about Jesus or about any number of things. And again, it's okay. It's cool to really care about different things. So again, I want to
and you could be that way about atheism and science,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, right? I mean, you can be contemptible of anyone who is dumb enough to believe in God.
Well, I remember when you and I were younger, we see those Darwin, there's like the little fishes on the back of the cars. Yeah. And people had like the Darwin, like eating the fish.
Yeah.
Or like we're jumping ahead, but there's an awareness here that there's a variety of ways to make meaning in the world, some of which have a lot to do with politics, some of which don't, which again helps us better appreciate how half the people voted differently than us, and it's not because they're idiot assholes, Another thing, again, an invitation here as part of the preamble is to really encourage people to show up with that learner mindset. Again, take your knowing lenses off through which you evaluate everything into all the ways you do, and just show up, be curious, both here, but then take that curiosity with you. So that learner mindset is something I'm going to touch back upon at times later, so I wanted to make sure we had mentioned it here. So, 2 questions to kind of orient us. Keith, you already mentioned how like literally every demographic shifted right. Every county.
Minus 2, which are important because there are 2 that did not shift, yeah.
County in the U.S., according to the New York Times, shifted right. Every one. Even the bluest counties had a slight shift, a red shift from where they voted in 2020.
Right.
So this is interesting.
So what happened is everyone became a little bit more fascist. I think that's the only explanation that this is my show, by the way.
Right. Others might say that that large percentage of people started seeing things more clearly. Again, this is the lensing thing. I know Rob Smith uses lensing a lot, so I really like that metaphor because it's so helpful and relevant for all of us who have, different sunglasses and, filters on our phones, et cetera. So how can we better understand, appreciate this without resorting to that typical, reactive Amber mindset of like, oh, they're naive, they're bad people, they're this is, they're that is, they're this other is, they're all the is, they're other than us. We're the good guys, they're the bad guys. So
right.
We're going to find ourselves we're going to find that bubbling up, especially when our deeper identity triggers get sort of pulled. So notice that and just keep moving on. Just remain present and curious. Okay. Yep. Second question.
And I do want to open up to the empathy of I know some people firsthand that have had very challenging, troubling experiences with people on a narcissism spectrum and things like that. And so an election like this, for some people, does bring up their own trauma, their own projections around that, their own truths around that. And so I just want to honor the sort of complexity that a lot of us swim in when these things come up. National politics can feel incredibly inside the bedroom personal. So I just want to acknowledge the intimacy of that. And as for me, as a part of being empathetic to people that are really deeply triggered by the outcome in this election.
Yeah. And again, just for your listeners who aren't watching, this first question has an electoral map of the U.S. with all the red and the dots of blue here and there. So that's the image that was for this slide. The second question has the same image of the country, but it has the American flag superimposed upon it. It says, how does that aspiration for higher ground inform and support your own thinking on complex topics when it comes to promoting the health of the whole spiral in your life and in the world around you? So that's that second big question I want all of us learners to kind of have in mind as we're appreciating and looking through different perspectives. Sure, we're going to disagree with lots of them, or we're going to see them as very partial. We're going to grant their accuracy, but say that they're very partial. Okay, that's all fine. But again, how can we manage to continue our initial integral aspiration to see the entire spiral and also be able to see through each of those little levels of the spiral and within each of these value stacks? So again, it's about creating that more comprehensive vision. So as aspiring integralists, when we decide to push the button, we're taking into consideration as many of those things as possible, and yet we're still going to be able to act in the world. We're not just sort of like paralyzed in the wishy-washy space of, I don't know, there's so many good perspectives. It's like, okay, but you got to push a button ultimately, right? So that's what we're going to try to get to. Keith, this slide is just a quick recap of integral theory. We did this earlier. So again, the blue.
I think we can skip this one. We'll just keep moving. Yeah.
Perfect.
We sort of have it. Yeah.
This is the structure content fallacy, where we take those cultural value stacks and we lay them out on the y-axis. So we have the x-axis of developmental orders using Keegan's language going up. And then we have the value stacks as silos within which we can be rooted and from which we can sprout. So separating out the structure from the content. Again, just because somebody's talking about DEI does not mean they're a fifth order self-transforming mind. And in order to get to fifth order self-transforming mind, you do not need to go through the progressive landscape. So those are the two implications I want to point to here. When we look at the culture war, where are the battlefronts in the culture war?
Right. And again, so third order again is amber blue, and second order would be red. Or
right.
Or power. We haven't talked about it at all, but second order would be power based. It's don't tell me what don't tell me what to do. Might makes right. I'm my own boss. No one cages me in. I won't blah blah blah. Right. So we all go through that when we're sort of preteens, teens. We sort of can be in a lot of that kind of stuff, and younger. No, I guess preteens and younger. Developmentally.
Well, I mean, that energy's there.
It's would be the hallmark from a orange or green perspective of sort of sociopathy, I think, too, right? People that are at the second order red tend to be the ones that end up in jail.
Yes. And you mentioned sociopathy. There's statistics vary again on this, but like 4% of the adult population are actual sociopath, psychopath, like the dark triad. And they have harnessed all their little red horses to their engine, and they are running full speed through society in a very sort of parasitic, instrumental, my needs are what I'm here to serve, and you guys, none of you count in the sense. So that's a 4%. So they're sort of like anchored in red. They may be brilliant tacticians, right? But that's where their deeper motivations come from. So again, that's a side issue, but it's relevant here. So
I think it's relevant too, in that I think some of the charges, without commenting on my opinion on it, but some of the charges against Trump are that he is in that dark triad, that he is essentially a sociopath. So there's a large section of progressive liberals that believe that is very much true, which does inform the way that they look at the election and generate some of the hand-wringing and depression that we're seeing that's coming from those circles.
Indeed. So looking at the froth and fury, so one of the pictures I have here is the third order culture wars, which we've all seen variations of this. There's the one with the flag that has a rabbit, like the rabbit, my rabbit versus your duck, and the image is the exact same. It's that Rorschach test. Is this a rabbit or a duck? And they're like marching on each other. So this one has, we have our heroic adventurers, and they have their brutish invaders. We have our noble populace. They, in quotes, have their backward savages. We have our great religion. They have their primitive superstitions. So the three main value spheres that we've talked about here today, the traditionalists, the moderns, and the progressives, they are constantly... there's no way for people within that amber blue third order framework to see those other value stack members as anything other than less than. Like your typical modern value stack believer will see religious people as backward, superstitious, rubes, and they'll see the DEI woke crowd as they don't even know what's going on over there, but looks like a lot of noise, and they seem really angry, but we're trying to stay focused here. But then the traditionalist we'll look at the moderns and be like, oh, they're so detached, they have no larger purpose, or they're going to end up nihilistic and depressed. And again, I don't know what's going on with the progressives. And the progressives look at both the moderns and the traditionals. They go, guys, we're trying to make things better. You guys are greedy money mongers in the middle there, the moderns, and you traditionalists, you're just going backwards. The future is forwards, and that's where we're going. So there's this lot of
So let me just interrupt you there.
Yeah, please.
So yeah, I mean, to say it another way, these three value stacks: traditional, which would be amber; modern, which would be orange; and progressives, which would be green. These value stacks, what you're saying, I'm hearing you say, is that when the three of them look at each other, what the three of them have in common is they all believe that the other two are wrong. And
Yes.
and not just wrong, but often stupid, fascist, communist, entitled, violence, right? So like
all the things. Yeah.
Right. So what one of the things that developmental theory predicts with a horrific accuracy is that these three value spheres can't see the other ones on their own terms and respect them on their own terms. So
Impossible. Yeah.
well, progressive liberal who's at the fourth order is green, at the 4.5 that is green. They're going to have a hard time like sitting down with a fundamentalist Christian evangelical guy and really like genuinely respecting and appreciating their worldview. That's going to be almost impossible for them, just like it's going to be almost impossible, or frankly impossible, for the fundamentalist evangelical to look at the liberal pro-trans, pro-LGBTQ, or pro-whatever, pro-Palestine, and look at that and have any respect for that point of view or understand it. So I just want to sort of put a little more of a bow on that so it's clear.
Yeah. And this is something like everybody talks about this. Like, Rand Stagen talks about this. Steve McIntosh talks about this. All the integral luminaries all talk about the fact that when you're in that third order, when you have that third order lens on, it distorts the other into all these unkind categories. It distorts and belittles the other to elevate you. Because of course, why would I believe what's inferior? Whatever my team believes is clearly the best reason, and this is why. And so that's a big part of the culture wars, is this sort of like, and this is perpetual. This is always going to exist. The second part, and this is Keith, you talked about this, like, you're not the boss of me. The second order emergent, the late teens, early 20s, like a lot of them are angry, like the Rage Against the Machine, fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. That was like the anthem of like the angry late teenagers. And, it's got a good beat. I appreciate that. You're not the boss of me. But there's also a lot of people that are just frankly sort of like confused. Like, I don't know, I guess I'll go to college because my parents are paying for it and living in their house kind of sucks. So I don't know. There's not necessarily that angry, rebellious component, although that's a big engine of development. A lot of it's just trying to like find your way forward. Like, we don't have a monoculture where those paths forward are prescribed. And some cultures have more or less freedom from those paths, but you're still picking a path. So a lot of people today are like, I don't know, do I do this? Do I do that? I'm just going to kind of keep moving forward. I'm going to kind of go with the crowd around me. All my friends are going to college. I'm going to go to college. All my friends are applying for internships at McKinsey. I'm going to do that. Like, I'm just going to I'm going to sort of like evaluate that. They're like learning, they're making their way into that third order framework, even if it's not a clean, crisp, like easy fit, like a monoculture that exists in other places, especially in other times. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but let's use the same language because you keep switching from Keegan to spiral dynamics, and I just want to make sure we use the same thing or use both, just so it's not confusing to people. Keegan's work is known but not super well known.
Okay, so why don't you do the recap then to do the integral?
I think it's clear. I think we made it clear enough. That's
perfect. So here's the meat of the issue: the what were they thinking framework that we're going to use today to really unpack some different possible narratives that people who voted for Harris or for Trump that we can.
Here we go. So this is it.
This is it. Yeah.
Okay. So, and I'm going to remind everyone. So just do third, fourth. Oh no, it's right there. I see it's in the brackets. Okay. Yep.
So on the x-axis we have the third order, blue in integral parlance, with the developmental structures that are operating are more about being a team player, a faithful follower. You're aligning with what does it mean to be a good person and how do I show up in this context of other people to be appreciated and valued? How can I make progress? How can I gain status? How can I fit in and succeed by fitting in? They seek direction, they're reliant, and they orient to alliances. So then above that, we have the fourth order, which is orange in the integral parlance. It's more agenda-driving, independent, problem-solving, builds their own frame. They have that knower mindset where they can kind of be the expert. And often they orient to principles. And so what we're going to see here, as we spell out shortly, is that sometimes these people can be single-issue voters. They're going to pick a principle that's most important. They're going to deprioritize the other, and they're going to make their decision based on that principle. But then getting back to the x-axis, above the fourth order orange is a fifth order integral. These are multi-frame, interdependent, problem-finding mindset, the learner mindset, and orients to the net health of the spiral as a whole. So what we're going to do here is unpack what could a pro-Harris voter be thinking, and what could a pro-Trump voter be thinking within each of these different mindsets, these levels, but then across the value stacks of traditional, modern, and progressive. So it's a pretty clean matrix we have here. We're going to start filling in some of the rationales that could make sense for people who are there developmentally and also they're oriented to the cultural value stack of those around them.